Hey, today we're going to go over one of our church core values called Lights on, Windows Open, which also just happens to be the name of this podcast, Lights On. Let's jump into today's conversation.
Well, like you just said, we're going to be talking about our church value, Lights on, Windows Open. That is the name of the podcast, which I think it probably has a few different layers. Like lights on,
Right.
we're thinking, right? Light bulb.
Right.
But also the church value, and we get to live as lights for Jesus. Our lights are on, we're sharing our faith.
Right.
So I guess there are a couple layers to it. But
100%. That's why I loved it when Lauren brought up that idea. It's like, yes, lights on, transparency, our core values. The epiphany of your coming to faith in Jesus. Jesus turns on the light in the dark room for you, like let's be a light on the hill, like all kinds of let's lights on. That's the way to
absolutely.
go.
And so I was thinking we had Church 101 recently, and as
Yes,
you're
sir.
sharing that, we share some of our church values, and you mentioned Lights on, Windows Open. And I remember the first time you shared that was a church value here. It resonated with me because it's surprisingly not a church value everywhere.
Right.
It should be, but it's not. And you make a point of talking about it because often we feel like churches maybe don't have their lights on. There's a curtain, and a lot happens
100%.
behind the curtain, which is well intentioned. It's like we want to make sure people can focus on their walk with God and they don't need to know everything. But we are the church. Like it's not this building, it's us as individuals. And we wanted to let people know what's happening as a church. But it's more than just a church value, it's a value that we as a church want the individual members to also have. We want all of our lives to be lights on, windows open, where we're not living in secrecy. We're not living these reclusive, hidden lives that nobody gets to see. It's the secret lives of Christian guys. It's
Right.
not
Yes.
like that.
Yeah.
We want to be lights on, windows open, where people know about what's happening. I just remember the first time I heard that, I was like, that's brilliant. So, like, do you want to talk a little bit about
Sure.
what that means
Well,
and why it's a value?
Let's be honest. If lights on, windows open, the concept of it resonates with you, it's probably because a lot of churches have intentionally or unintentionally caused some church hurt in many people's lives. And church hurt, let's be honest, it comes from inappropriate behavior. And often we do not let the lights on or windows open. In case you haven't been reading between the phrase here, that means we're going to live transparently to the best of our ability. We want to do that as an organization, as a pastoral team, but we also want you to do that as an individual who's living for Jesus. And when it comes to churches, I mean, I know a variety of people who've gone through church hurt and they feel like everything's swept under the rug. They were terminated from a church staff inappropriately and a church made them sign an NDA. And it's like the opposite of lights on, windows open. In fact, I really struggle with the idea of churches having that core value or a value like that and then making you sign NDA. And I'm like, isn't that the opposite of lights on, windows open, that you can't talk about this or we're going to sue you? Like, what? In fact, someone at membership came up to me after we taught that value, lights on, windows open, and brought just that up. My friend was on staff at the last church I was part of, and he had to sign an NDA, and it just sat wrong with me. And I was like, it sat wrong with you because we were made to live in the light of Jesus and not hide. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't some things that are private. Of course, there are some topics that are shared in confidence with a pastor, and we're not to blab them around, or that just means you're gossiping, right? That's not what we mean. But what we're going to do as a church staff is we're going to try to be as honest as possible with the church body and the church staff members about what is going on in our church community, what's going on in our church as an organization to the best of our ability. And that will be true with finances and a staff coming on and staff leaving, and why ministries are starting and why ministries are stopping, and why we're making certain changes to the facility or to the programs or to the methodology or the worship style. Like we're going to be lights on, windows open. Now, the problem is many people will come into a church and they'll hear this lights on, windows open, and we'll share why we're doing it, and they think that this is a lie and that there's some other alternative motive going on that we haven't shared, and it's because they're bringing church hurt with them to our church. But lights on, windows open, we try to own it from a staff perspective and a church perspective, and we want to try to minimalize to the best of our ability the church hurt that someone can have at least that's not self-inflicted, right? And so that would be on the church staff side.
Yeah, but as individuals living lights on, windows open, it means we're really just being transparent with others and letting them into the mess of our life. Because when we invite
Absolutely.
other people to experience what's going on in our lives, they not only get to see the mess and all the ugly baggage we may have, but they also get to see our Savior Jesus at work cleaning up that mess, and he's at work fixing the brokenness.
Right.
Like when they get to see some of that hurt that you have, or some of the dysfunction you've lived through or experienced, or maybe been involved like operating the dysfunction, they get to see beyond like the facade. 'Cause sometimes they think that, I mean, we're pastors, so probably more so us than others, but as if you have a title Christian, or you claim to be a Christian towards others, they start to think like, oh, you got it all put together. You're at least going to pretend you have it all put
Right.
together. And they start to judge you and analyze that. But when they see you're a real person who's really living through brokenness, who's really living with struggles, who's living through a mess of some kind, they'll get to see Jesus at work in all of that.
Well, and I think part of the problem why people feel that way, Jesse, where they feel like you have this facade up and you're not really letting people in, is because we know the trending headlines in Christian news, or at least Christians that make headlines. You know, it's like the Christian that has the scandal. Those are easy to capture the headlines, and then it just kind of taints society's idea of what Christians are and how they try to pretend like everything's okay. But I think the prescription to that is what you just said. Let's be transparent with what we're going through. And it's not that I came to faith in Jesus and now life is perfect, roses and lollipops, and nothing bad ever happens to me. But it's like, no, I came to faith in Jesus. He's doing a good work on me, but I'm still a piece of work, you know, for the better and for the worse. And I need Jesus to continue to refine me. And I'm better than I was yesterday. Here's where I am today, and here's where I hope to be tomorrow. And so, like, as I was walking through my own sobriety, going through 12-step program as an individual, not as a leader, but as an individual going through it, I had a relationship with Jesus, but he was still cleaning up the mess in the middle of that. And I feel like the most powerful testimonies that we can give that draw people in both to Jesus and to be an understanding this value of lights on, windows open is sharing our shortcomings. I share in my sermons all the time where I fall short. I'll talk about at times about my relationship that I'll have with my kids and how I let my anger or something get the best of me, and how if I had to apologize, because I want people to see that I'm real and that I struggle with things that they might struggle with. I'll share about my past with my addiction. I'll share about my past with codependency. I'll share about my past divorce with having a broken heart and anxiety. I'll share about my past that when I was young and single in my early 20s, I wasn't just codependent, but I would search for happiness in my relationships and chase after things for joy that weren't bringing me joy. And these broken things that you share about, and then sharing how like, hey, I'm kind of naturally wired by my past to want to be codependent, so I have to be aware of my shortcomings, because I will find triggers that will cause me to go back to those things. And so it's not that I'm living this perfect life for Jesus. It's that when I catch myself getting messed up again and caught up in this world stuff, I repent and kind of get back to where God's going in my life. And so it's not living a perfect life. It's sharing what you're going through in your behavioral issues. But I would say lights on, windows open is not just holding back on your actions and your sin activity or your flaws or the hard parts of your life, but it's also sharing things that often we don't like to talk about in the church, or that you might be embarrassed of, or that you don't want people know. Now, I say this with love. I love everybody who goes to our church. I love our church body, the community, so much. But there's at least half a dozen people that are struggling with some kind of cancer scare or cancer illness, or potentially dying of cancer in our church, that have asked to stay anonymous. And my encouragement is like, hey, I'll keep it anonymous if that's what you want. But my prayer is that we grow to a point where we're going to be lights on, windows open. Say what needs to be said, because what you're actually kind of doing at some level is you're robbing a community from praying for you and showing up for you and being there for you in a time of need, kind of thing. I also say that, like I said last night in membership, hey, if your marriage is on the rocks, please don't wait until you're filing for divorce to come sit down and have a conversation with me. Mm-hmm. That's like waiting until you're in a car accident to say, I think I shouldn't be driving tonight. I'm drunk, right? Like, don't wait until the wreckage is there. let's acknowledge that there's a problem before the wreckage comes into your life. Let's be lights on, windows open.
I totally agree with all that. And something I've also seen as I witness people in our church living lights on, windows open. Lauren and I will talk about it at home. Like, we know one of our other values is to believe the best in others, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a staff value, but it
staff
bleeds
value.
over.
So
We have church values and staff values.
Sorry. I'll study them up. I'll
But
be
that's
better.
good, because
But
I do teach about it at times from the stage.
But to believe the best in others, if you know they're living lights on, windows open, it empowers you to believe the best in them, because it's so much easier to live that out, because you know, like, I know they aren't hiding anything, so I know that there's not some ulterior motive. They don't have some hidden agenda that's like trying to get the best of me. I can believe the best about other people if I know they're living lights on, windows open, because I know that their heart is for Jesus.
And I would say believing the best in each other is a framework of how to approach a situation with a friend, a coworker, a loved one, a church member. When we're at odds with them, instead of coming in and being, it's pausing for a moment and thinking, what could possibly be doing this in their life? And then choosing to believe the best case scenario before you approach that person. So you don't come at them thinking that they're dirt bags necessarily, but you think that something else is happening in their life. And that could happen on a variety of levels. And we teach that as a staff to treat our volunteers that way. I will talk to members in the church that are going at it with each other. Hey, I want you to believe the best in that person. When people judge me harshly, I want to be like, I want you to believe the best in me. Don't believe the worst in me. Start by believing the best in me, because I believe the best in you. And when someone's saying something terrible to me, I'll just turn it on. I'm like, hey, right now I'm going to believe the best in you, and that you're misspeaking. Like earlier this year, someone called me a dictator, but they said it very casually in a conversation, like, whoa, I'm going to believe the best in you, and believe that was just you kind of flippantly saying that, because like, I would really be offended if you think that I'm a dictator in the way that I live as a church. I live pretty open-handed with my leadership and where we're going and what we're doing, and like, come on, like, I'm going to believe the best in you, that you didn't mean the words that you said, that you're just kind of throwing things out in emotions. And that actually ended up being the truth. It's like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that. You're right. I didn't mean you're actually a dictator. Because there are pastors who act like dictators out there. And I can see sometimes in churches where church hurt exists where that can be a thing. So what I'm trying to get back to saying here is believing the best in a person is actually paired with, before you find out, lights on, windows open going on in their life. So you're like, man, I've noticed that they look pretty peaked and sick at church. They're getting really skinny. I wonder if they're sick. Believe the best in them. And so instead of them thinking like they're on drugs, cocaine addicts, heroin addicts, it's like, man, maybe they're really going through something. Maybe they're starving and they don't have food. Maybe they got a medical condition. And so you believe the best in them, and it causes you to respond to that person differently, because you're showing love and care as a respond, rather than thinking like, there they are, strung out again. That's an extreme situation, but you kind of get my mindset.
I think that's a good point that you mentioned about how believing the best is often in times of conflict or misunderstanding where you may not know what's going on. And I was thinking that we could talk about a little bit of like living lights on. As Christians, how should we approach certain situations? How can we live as Christians in different things? And one of the things I was wondering is, how can we live as Christians, live our faith out in times of conflict? Because we all have conflict, whether we want to or not. Whether it's a big conflict or a little conflict, we all have that. So how can we really live out our faith and live as Christians in a way that honors God in conflict?
Yeah, I think lights on, windows open, that transparent part of that, say what needs to be said. Now, that doesn't mean like yell at a person when you're frustrated with them, but also
Pastor Chris said,
let's just acknowledge that sometimes relationships can get tense between one another, and we need to have a sit down, come to Jesus moment and address it. And I think as long as you're coming in open with wanting Jesus to be the spiritual glue between the relationship, I think you'll be okay. The hard part is when we go to reconcile a relationship and we're actually not trying to reconcile. We're just trying to get you to realize I'm right and you're wrong. And anytime we come into a disagreement where it's going to be I'm right, you're wrong, you're going to have a hard time fixing that relationship. And the best is going to be like, okay, we're going to agree to disagree. And sometimes that's a situation, to agree to disagree because we're not ready to reconcile yet. But when you're really trying to reconcile, it's different. I'll say it this way. Some of the best marriage advice I got from counseling was this idea that I need to care about what my wife is feeling, not if I am correct in why she shouldn't be upset. You see, I was going to a counselor and I was telling the counselor, she doesn't understand. I have good intentions. She doesn't get what my good intentions are. And so she gets upset. And then that gets me upset because I'm telling her I had good intentions and you shouldn't be upset because I did something good, not bad. You're taking it wrong. And then that just creates a bigger fight. And you say, Chris, the problem is you don't care how she feels. And regardless if you're right or wrong in that conversation, it really doesn't matter. What matters most is how she feels about that situation. In other words, the person that you love is hurt. And if you can acknowledge for a moment a person that you love and you care about is hurting, it really doesn't matter who's right or wrong. So instead of saying, hey, you need to get with the program, stop being a big old wimp, I was right, you're in the wrong. Instead, you walk over and you hold their hand as if it's your spouse. Honey, darling, I am so sorry that what I did caused you to feel this way. Can you explain to me how this made you feel this way so I can try to the best of my ability avoid doing this again in the future and causing you to feel this way? What did you do there? You just disarmed Satan from continuing to put division in that relationship, and you acknowledged it really doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong. What matters to me is how you emotionally feel about this situation. And if you approach a situation with that kind of care and tenderness, almost always you'll have some kind of reconciling behavior, at least as an outcome from that. And also, if you can realize the other person's emotions matter to you, it causes you not to back at them, be like, oh man, I really hurt their feelings. And you feel bad and you want to heal that relationship.
Mm-hmm. I think often conflict is blown out of proportion between people because we forget we're on the same side. Like in a marriage, the two of you are both fighting to be married. You're fighting together, hopefully, to run together in your marriage, to run forward together, move things forward. Mm-hmm. So when conflict arises, it causes division. We allow Satan to get a foothold and to cause separation when that's not what neither person wants, really. So right. I think as Christians, how can we handle conflict beyond spousal conflict? Like, let's say you and your coworker have conflict. Like, there's not one solution, one size fits all kind of an answer, but through it all, would you say the solution to conflict, like in your marriage issue, would be just humbly approaching it, putting the other person first?
Right. So if there's a conflict in the workplace, I think you got to figure out how are you going to move forward. Now, sometimes there's some kind of behavior in the workplace where it's just so inappropriate. I don't know if you can move forward. You know, if there was like some kind of touching that shouldn't have happened or something like that, or
your boss comes up to you and grabs your hand.
Yeah, if there's
and
a
says,
level
darling.
of harassment, that's not kind of where I'm trying to talk through. That might take like legal action in HR. But what I am trying to say is during the spats or the frustration, because there will be times where people will irk you, you've got to decide, how am I going to work with this person and bury the hatchet? So I don't come at them trying to attack them, at least on a workplace level, not a physical level, of course, but attack them metaphorically or fight with them. You want to get along. You got to get along in the office space. You got to be productive. You got projects to do. You got results to have. And the more you can flourish in the office place in relationships, the more you're going to move forward in promotions and raises, and your boss will think better of you. If you create turbulence in the workplace, you're becoming a problem for your supervisor and your organization. And it doesn't matter if you can bring in the big bucks or really close the deal, or you're great at doing this skill set. If you're making all the other staff miserable because you can't get along, you've got to figure that out, because that will mess up the workplace environment. And part of that is learning people's personality types. Our staff likes to learn who is a thinker and a feeler, and then adjust the way we treat one another, talk to one another accordingly. So some people will come into your ministry or into your workplace. We have a big volunteer team, and so our church has got a variety of different personality types. And some people are just a little bit more on the feeler spectrum, and other people are more on the task-driven, get results spectrum. It doesn't mean that the thinker task person doesn't feel, and it doesn't mean the feelers don't think. Please don't hear me wrong. but it just means one puts logic in front of feelings and the other puts feelings in front of logic, like in the stacking order. And so they're going to feel this cup, how it feels in your hand, before they'll think about how this is meant to drink out of, right? Or the other one's going to think this cup's meant for me to drink out of. Okay, now in the workplace, you have people that are feelers and thinkers, and you got to learn, how do I navigate those types of relationships? And that's where personality profiles are from. People use the Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, Strength Finders, personality profile index. There's many of them out there. I had a coworker that I learned through doing the Myers-Briggs that she will always put the relationships she has with vendors and with people in the office place before the task and results. And that's just the way she's wired. And she will never sacrifice the relationship, the friendship, how that person thinks about the good vibes over getting something done. Where sometimes I'm like, hey, that's business. We just got to move forward. If they don't like that we went with the other client, they should have gave us a better offer. Doesn't matter. They're my friend. They were 2 times more expensive. Where she'd be like, yeah, but they're my friends. And like, And so you just got to learn how people work together, how they're wired. And that might help you settle that. And then also, I think in the workplace, and then this is in relationships in general, the way we look at something. Like right now, I'm holding this cup. For you, this is a black round cup. For the person sitting on the other end of the coffee cup sees a handle facing them. And then from this angle, there's a logo on the side of the cup. You don't see a logo. You don't see a handle. They see a handle. They see a logo. All people are seeing the same cup. We just have different perspectives of that cup, right? And so just to give you an idea, Cameron, there's a logo and a handle, right? And we're all looking at the same object, meaning we can all see the conflict differently and yet be looking at the same conflict because of the way that we are wired. We take in information, we hear information, and we think about information differently.
Yeah, as Christians, it's really important that we handle conflict in a way that leads to unity, because unity is a huge theme throughout Scripture, that as believers, we should be unified primarily on the gospel and on God and his love for us, but also like we should be unified in everything we can be. I think another thought I had was, as Christians, how should I handle sharing my faith? How should I handle sharing the gospel with others? And I thought of this because we recently as a church implemented at the end of services, we all say a prayer together. And it's a salvation prayer that everybody recites. That's what everybody gets saved every week, because that's not how it works. You get saved at one time
Right.
and you're saved. But it's a prayer that we recite at the end of our services so that people who want to receive Jesus have a prayer. They know what they can say. Not that it's magic words or a magic script, but it's a prayer that can help lead to repentance in that moment of salvation. But as a body, we're reciting it so that we also practice as we go into our lives, as we go into our workplace or around our family, around our friends. We know a prayer that can help lead people to faith as well. So what do you think? How, as Christians, would you encourage people to live out sharing the gospel and sharing their faith?
Right. Well, one thing I try to do is I try to think through my actions to the best of my ability. Who's watching me, and what if other types of people saw me doing this? And that might be when I'm alone, and that might be when I'm at work, and that might be when I'm at the ballpark or the grocery store. And so it's like, hey, if everybody at church was watching me and I left this shopping cart abandoned in the middle of the parking lot versus walking it back to the cart return, what would the church body think of me? And I think, well, let me represent Jesus well and just go the extra mile and put the cart back in the cart return. Now, that's a very simple thing to do. And I'm not saying that because I put the cart where it belongs, people are going to come to faith in Jesus. But it's that type of behavior where you're making sure, to the best of your ability, you're kind of rising above. You're kind of going forward. And so you try to think through the words that I say, the actions that I do, how are they rubbing off on other people around me? And it can be real. I'm not saying you have to be fake. Be you, but be the you that draws people in, not pushes people away. So the first part of witnessing to folks is not repelling people. And that's why I really struggle with anyone who's standing on a soapbox with a megaphone screaming like, turn or burn, we're all going to hell without Jesus. What they're saying is actually true, but they're repelling everybody away with their technique of sharing the gospel. And I think we should be attracting people into the gospel. It doesn't mean that we're softening the gospel, but there is a way to show them that this makes a difference in your life. I think a great way to witness to people is being lights on, windows open, to bring that value back around. And that's sharing your testimony. Sharing your testimony, not just saying, I was at church and I got the feel good bumps on my arm, so I said yes and raised my hand and said the salvation prayer. That's the moment you crossed the line of faith. But your testimony is where you were before Jesus, when you came to faith in Jesus, and what Jesus is doing now in your life now that you're following Jesus. That's your testimony. And so for me, I could go into my addiction and 12-step program and how God has helped me sober up and stay away from alcohol. And now I don't even have the temptation of alcohol in my life anymore. I mean, I walked down one of the aisles at the grocery store the other day, and the bottles of liquor meant so little to me. When I was looking at them, I thought, these might as well be paint cans. Like, I'm so not interested in them. No, that's not everybody's story, but that can be a story. Part of my story can be that feeling of anxiety. Hey, I understand what it's like when you're going through a divorce. You wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning with anxiety, and you start thinking, this can't be my life. This has to be a bad movie. This is not what my parents wanted for my life. My teachers wanted for my life. My Sunday school leaders wanted for my life. And now here I am with a train wreck of a life, and I know what that's like. And so when I share that story with a divorced person, it brings them in, right? And then I could tell them, here's what I know. When I was going through the divorce, everything in me wanted to follow culture's way of handling your broken heart, which is to go out and hook up with someone, go get some strange, right? But instead, I decided every day to wake up and just beg God to give me enough love in my love fuel tank, as if it's like a gas tank in your car. Fill me up just enough, God, to get through the day so I don't need to reach out to a coping mechanism. And see what I'm doing there? I'm sharing that I've been broken like you. I'm sharing that I reached out to a living God. I'm sharing that God responded and he gave me what I needed to get through the day. What I am doing is I'm witnessing to someone, and then I can ask them the question, like, have you ever tried reaching out to God to fill that love tank to get you through the day so you don't have to go for that coping mechanism? Have you come to faith? Have you said the prayer? And see, now it's an open door, because now I'm connecting them in. Now they might not be ready yet, but at least now I've kind of built some bridges in and dropped some seeds.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about the shopping cart or the way you handle interpersonal conversations, I'm reminded in the Old Testament and New Testament of kind of instruction we're given in Proverbs 3. We're told, in all your ways, acknowledge God and he'll make your path straight. Or in all your ways, submit to God. In all your ways, put God first. So whether it's thinking, what do I do with this shopping cart now that I'm done shopping and it's in the middle of the street? It's not, I'm just going to leave it here. It's like, all right, how can I honor God in this decision? Or as I'm talking to people, how can I honor God? How can I put God first in what I'm saying? I'm going to lean into God's grace in my life and show them that I was a mess and God restored me and gave me a relationship with him. So you're putting God first in that, not just in your big life decisions, but in your little life decisions or the way you talk, you're putting God first. And in the New Testament, we're told to be ready in season and out of season to give a reason for the hope that's in us. And we're told that we need to be ready to talk about what matters most at all times. So when I think of how we can share the gospel with others as a Christian, how do I share the gospel? How do I share God's work in my life? It's really just keeping him at the forefront, keeping him in a position of supremacy in your life where he's always number one. No matter what I'm doing, God is still in charge. If I'm trying to run into the grocery store real quick, I'm not like trying to hide from people, but I'm willing to take time to tell people about how good God is in my life. And I'm willing to always put God first in that.
Right. And so lights on, windows open for a church. That means we're going to be a community that tries to, as an organization, be transparent. Lights on. We're not hiding anything in the dark, and the windows are open. You can see right on into the house. As a staff, we're going to try to be as honest to you about our walk with Jesus, what we're doing as a staff, why we're leading the ministry we are. And then as individuals who make up the church body, we're trying to say what needs to be said, reconcile relationships, not hide anything, not have anything in a hidden agenda. So we're living lights on, windows open. And I think that's what a biblical value is to live open with what God is doing in your life so you can share the gospel, not just in the theology or the scriptures, but in the practical about how it changes your life, what you're going through, and how you messed up, but God still continues to give you grace and pick up the pieces and live in your life again. So that's lights on, windows open Thanks for checking us out. If you want to go in deeper on this podcast or more with Lights On, you can check out my YouTube channel.